Nakayima, the ghost who lived in the tree. Part 2. The story of Nakayima therefore continued long after Kato died. People still climbed the hill. Some came seeking healing. Some came asking for children. Some came seeking prosperity. Some came simply because their parents had brought them as children, and they wanted to understand the place that had remained part of their family's memory. The traditions surrounding the shrine have changed over generations, and the meaning of the site is understood differently by different people. But the great tree remains a powerful cultural landmark. Accounts of the shrine describe offerings, prayers, and spiritual consultations, while the tree's enormous buttress roots create the mysterious chambers that have helped preserve its aura for generations. And there is one final thing people say in this fictional tale. They say that if you climb the hill late in the evening, when the last light has disappeared behind the trees and the village below has begun turning on its lamps, you should not call Nakayima's name simply to prove that you are brave. Do not laugh at the tree. Do not challenge the darkness. Do not stand beneath the roots and shout that you do not believe. You may hear nothing. You may see nothing. You may walk away convinced that every story was invented. And perhaps that is exactly what will happen. But if, while walking back down the hill, you suddenly hear a woman's voice singing somewhere behind you, do not turn around immediately. Keep walking. And if the voice calls your name a second time, do not answer. Because according to the tale, Nakayima does not chase everyone who visits her hill. She does not need to. She only needs to know that you heard her. And if you ever hear an old woman in Mubende say, "Do not invite what you do not understand," remember that she may not be trying to frighten you. She may simply be repeating the warning that Kato once ignored. The old men around the fire used to say that Kato's encounter with Nakayima should have been the end of the matter. He had apologized, he had humbled himself, and he had learned the lesson that pride can sometimes carry a person farther into darkness than any road ever could. But there was one thing he had not told the village, and it was something he himself did not understand until many years later. When he stood beneath the great tree and heard the woman's voice say, "Now you understand," he had noticed something behind the roots that he had never seen during his first visit. There was a narrow opening between two enormous roots, so dark that it appeared to have no bottom. From that opening came a smell of wet earth, old leaves, and something faintly sweet, like flowers that had been left too long on a grave. Kato had looked into it for only a moment before stepping away, but in that brief moment, he believed he saw the outline of a woman's face staring back at him. He never told anyone, not his mother, not Suleiman, not the elders. He carried the image in silence for the rest of his life, because every time he tried to describe it, his tongue seemed to become heavy. Yet years later, when he was an old man and young people gathered around him asking about the Nakayiima tree, he would sometimes stare into the fire and whisper, "There are things beneath that tree that are not meant to be dragged into the daylight." The years passed and the story of Kato gradually became part of the village's collection of warnings. Children heard it from their grandparents. Mothers repeated it when their sons became too bold. Men returning from drinking places would lower their voices when the road toward the hill came into conversation. But while Kato's experience faded into legend, the shrine itself remained a place people visited for deeply personal reasons. Some came carrying prayers for children. Others came hoping for healing. Some arrived burdened by poverty, family problems, failed marriages, or sickness, believing that the spiritual traditions associated with Nakayiima could offer them an answer. The great tree stood over all of it, its immense roots forming dark chambers and hollows that looked almost like rooms built by human hands. The tree itself is genuinely old and enormous, and accounts of the site describe several spaces among its buttress roots that are traditionally associated with different spiritual figures. To those who regarded the place as sacred, the tree was not simply timber rising from the earth. It was a living connection to an older world, a place where the boundary between memory, ancestry, and the present seemed unusually thin. Among those who knew the hill best was an elderly woman called Nalongo. She had lived near Mubende for most of her life, and people claimed she could tell stories about the shrine that would make even the bravest visitor uncomfortable. She was not a woman who shouted or tried to frighten people. In fact, she spoke so quietly that those who wanted to hear her had to lean toward her. One afternoon, a group of young men came to the hill, laughing and joking, determined to prove that the stories were nonsense. Nalongo watched them approach. One of them, a young man called Peter, pointed toward the great tree and laughed. "So this is the famous Nakayiima?" Nalongo nodded. "Yes," he laughed again. "I expected something frightening." The old woman studied him. "You have come looking for something frightening?" Peter grinned. "We have come to see whether there is anything here at all." Nalongo's expression changed. "Then do not ask the tree to show you." The other young men laughed. Peter walked closer to the roots. "Why?" he asked. "Because sometimes," Nalongo replied, "a person asks a question and spends the rest of his life regretting the answer." Peter ignored her. He placed his hand against the bark and shouted, "Nakayiima, if you are here, come out!" His friends laughed loudly behind him. Nalongo did not move. She simply watched. The wind that had been moving gently through the branches suddenly stopped. The laughter faded. Peter looked upward. Every leaf seemed frozen. There was not even the sound of an insect. The silence was so complete that Peter could hear his own breathing. Then something struck the trunk from inside. Once, a deep, hollow sound. Everyone froze. Peter stepped backward. Another sound came. This time it was louder. Boom, boom, boom. One of his friends whispered, "Let's go." Peter tried to laugh, but no sound came. Nalongo finally spoke. "You called her." Peter turned toward her. "What?" The old woman pointed toward the tree. "You called her. Now wait." Nobody waited. The young men ran down the hill, leaving Peter behind for several seconds before he finally followed. But when they reached the bottom, they discovered something strange. One of them was missing. His name was Musa. They called for him. They searched the road. They climbed back toward the hill. Nothing. Then just as darkness began to settle over Mubende, they heard Musa laughing from somewhere above them. They looked toward the tree. Musa stood there, but he was not laughing normally. His mouth was open in a wide smile, yet his eyes were empty. Peter called his name. "Musa!" Musa slowly turned. "Where were you?" Peter asked. Musa looked at him for several seconds and then said, "She asked me why you brought me." Peter's stomach tightened. "Who?" Musa smiled. "Your grandmother." Peter stared at him. "My grandmother is dead." Musa's smile disappeared. "Exactly." That night the boys told no one what had happened. Fear made them ashamed. They returned to their homes and pretended the day had passed normally. But Musa did not sleep. His mother later said that shortly after midnight, she heard him talking to someone in his room. At first she assumed he was on the phone, but when she opened the door, there was nobody with him. Musa was sitting upright on his bed, staring toward the corner. His mother asked who he was talking to. He looked at her with a confused expression and said, "The woman says I must go back." His mother asked, "Which woman?" Musa pointed toward the empty corner. "Her." His mother saw nothing. She grabbed her son by the shoulders and told him to stop frightening her. Musa began crying. "Mama, I don't want to go back." She held him tightly and whispered prayers into his hair until he finally fell asleep. The following morning, however, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. There were wet footprints on the floor leading from Musa's bed to the doorway. They were small, narrow footprints, like those of a barefoot woman. They stopped at the doorway. There were no footprints outside. Musa disappeared 3 days later. This time there was no laughter. The village searched everywhere. Men walked through gardens. Women searched paths. Children were warned to stay close to their homes. His mother cried until she became too weak to stand. Peter could barely speak. Finally, unable to carry the guilt any longer, he went to Nalongo and confessed everything. The old woman listened without interrupting. When he finished, she closed her eyes. "You should have left the hill alone," she said. Peter lowered his head. "Can he be found?" Nalongo was silent for a long time. "Perhaps." Peter looked up. "Where?" She pointed toward the hill. "Where else?" Peter shook his head. "I cannot go there." Nalongo looked at him sharply. "Then you will never know what happened to him." Peter began crying. "Please help me." The old woman sighed. "I am not the one who took him. If the old stories are what you believe they are, then you are dealing with something you do not control." She stood slowly and gathered her walking stick. "But if you want to search, go before sunset. And whatever you hear, do not answer if someone calls you from inside the tree." Peter went. 2 men accompanied him. They climbed the hill as the afternoon sun began to weaken. The forest became quieter with every step. When they reached the great tree, they found Musa's shirt lying beneath one of the roots. It was folded neatly. That frightened them more than finding it torn would have. One man whispered, "He wouldn't leave this." Peter picked it up. It was still damp. He looked toward the dark opening between the roots. "Musa?" he called. Nothing answered. He called again, "Musa!" From deep inside the tree came a faint reply. "Peter!" All 3 men froze. It was Musa's voice. One of the men immediately grabbed Peter's arm. "Don't answer." Peter stared into the darkness. "Musa?" The reply came again. "Peter, come inside." The voice sounded frightened. Peter stepped forward. The older man held him back. "Listen carefully," he whispered. "He is not calling you from inside." Peter frowned. "What do you mean?" The man pointed toward the ground. "Look at the roots." Peter looked down. There were footprints in the damp soil. They led toward the opening, but none came out. Then the voice spoke again. This time, it was not Musa. It was a woman's voice. "Peter." The young man stopped breathing. The voice continued softly. "You brought him here." Peter began trembling. "I did not." "You called me." "I am sorry." A long silence followed. Then the voice whispered, "You are always sorry after you see me." Peter fell to his knees. The other 2 men dragged him backward. They ran. None of them looked behind. But as they descended the hill, they heard footsteps following them through the forest. Slow footsteps, bare feet against dry leaves. They came closer, then stopped. The men kept running until they reached the village. Musa returned the following morning. He appeared at his mother's doorway just after sunrise. He was barefoot. His clothes were dirty. His face was pale. His mother screamed when she saw him. She ran forward and held him, crying uncontrollably. "Where have you been?" Musa said nothing. "Who took you?" "Nothing." "Did you sleep?" Musa finally looked at her. "I was not allowed to sleep." His mother stared at him. "Why?" He looked toward the hill. "She wanted me to listen." "What did she say?" Musa's eyes filled with tears. "She said the living forget too quickly." After that day, Musa was never the same. He stopped visiting the hill. He stopped laughing at spiritual stories. He became quiet and withdrawn. Sometimes his mother would find him sitting outside before dawn, staring toward the distant trees. One morning she asked him what he was looking at. He replied, "The tree." "Why?" "Because sometimes it looks back." His mother told him to stop saying such things. Musa nodded. But that evening, while the family sat eating supper, he suddenly dropped his spoon. Everyone looked at him. He was staring toward the doorway. His younger sister asked, "What is wrong?" Musa whispered, "She is here." The family turned toward the doorway. Nobody was there. His mother became angry. "Enough!" Musa did not move. He whispered again, "She wants Peter." Peter, who was sitting beside him, suddenly stood up. "Don't say my name." Musa looked at him. "I am not the one saying it." The lamp went out. Everyone screamed. For several seconds, the house was completely dark. Then someone began singing outside. It was a woman's voice, slow, mournful, beautiful. The melody seemed to come from far away, yet the singer sounded as though she were standing directly beside the house. Musa began shaking. Peter whispered, "Do not open the door." Nobody moved. The singing continued. Then came 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Peter closed his eyes. A woman's voice spoke from outside. "Peter." He covered his mouth. His mother began whispering prayers. The voice came again. "Peter." Then a third time. "Peter, you called me." The door slowly moved inward. Nobody touched it, and through the narrow opening, they saw a woman standing in the darkness. She was wearing white. Her face was hidden by her hair. She lifted one hand and pointed directly at Peter. The lamp suddenly came back on. The doorway was empty, but on the floor just inside the house was a small pile of red earth. The same red earth found on Mubende Hill. Peter stared at it. Nobody spoke. And from somewhere far beyond the village, from the direction of the ancient tree, came a final whisper carried by the night wind. "Come home." From that night forward, Peter never again laughed at the name Nakayiima. The real Nakayiima site has continued to attract pilgrims and visitors, and the tradition remains culturally significant. There have also been modern incidents at the tree, including a serious 2024 accident in which a large branch fell during preparations for an annual gathering, killing 4 people and injuring others.